first time being around? You're doing great. Just smile, Loretta, so you don't look like you're being held up.
Some films just have so much style. Like, the characters are cool, the dialogue is cool, the editing is cool, and even the colours are cool. This is Out of Sight, possibly one of the most important films of Steven Soderbergh's impressive career. It's not the one that got him his Oscar, or his most popular film, but it was a really important stepping stone towards him becoming the filmmaker he is today. Now, Soderbergh's different from other directors. For around 2 decades, he's been shooting and editing all of his films himself, which has given him an insane amount of creative control on every project. But he wasn't always able to do this. Bringing Out of Sight, it's both a romance and a crime caper, with some great dialogue and shit tons of style.
What the fuck was that?
You wanted to tussle. We tussled.
But it was also what Soderbergh needed after a streak of box office failures. Not that Out of Sight was even a huge hit itself, but it did pave the way for the ones he'd make a few years later. But what makes this film so cool? The easy answer is the characters. The film is adapted from an Elmore Leonard novel, and if there's one thing he excels at, it's writing memorable characters. You've got the smooth bank robber, Jack Foley, feisty federal marshal Karen Sisko, Dick the Ripper, Snoopy Miller, Buddy, motherfucking Glenn. Even the characters with literally 5 minutes of screen time steal every scene, like Michael Keaton as Ray Nicolette, a character he reprised from Jackie Brown.
Tell me, Ray, do you ever wear one that says undercover? No?
Even with Leonard's knack for punchy dialogue, some of the best lines are completely improvised, with one of my favourites being dropped by Don Cheadle.
A situation like this is a high potentiality for the common motherfucker to bitch out.
So this film has excellent characters and great actors, but let's be honest, it could have been so much worse if it was attached to a less interesting director than Steven Soderbergh. He brings this indie filmmaker charm to a pretty expensive studio film, and his eye for editing really shines through to make this a much more entertaining watch than your average wide release. After editing some of his earlier films himself, Soderbergh was able to bring interesting ideas to the table, like using freeze frames and non-linear storytelling. The thing he needed was a way to incorporate them properly. Enter Anne V. Coates, the editor of Goddamn Lawrence of Arabia, because who better to learn how to be a great editor from than the person that made one of the most important cuts in film history. After Pulp Fiction came out in 1994, non-linear storytelling was becoming much more mainstream, and a lot of directors were experimenting with it to make their films more stylish. And while Out of Sight does have that Tarantino vibe, which makes sense as Elmore Leonard is one of his biggest influences, the non-linear story structure was not done to mimic Tarantino. In fact, it was mostly done out of necessity. Early on, Soderbergh and screenwriter Frank Scott realised that the film wasn't working when being told chronologically, like it is in the book. It introduced a bunch of problems. One was that there's not any scenes in Lompoc in the book. The characters just keep mentioning their time spent there. Film is a visual medium, and it can't really get away with this. We needed to meet Snoopy and Ripley before they pop up in the second half of the film. Starting the film with Foley in jail in Lompoc is a problem. We'd then cut to his interview with Ripley and subsequent bank robbery, then boom, he's back in jail. It's a huge disservice to Foley's character because he's not this dumb.
He seems to be the only guy who kind of knows what he's doing.
And it would also be really boring as we'd start the film with 30 minutes of character introductions and exposition. And then there's the other problem of not introducing Karen, the other lead character, until like half an hour into the movie. Here's Soderbergh to break it down.
When I came on board, the film was being told in chronological order. And Scott, Frank, and I both felt that was a problem because we weren't meeting Karen until 30 minutes into the film. And we just felt that was too long. And Scott said, I think we've got to use flashbacks.
Here, non-linearity completely fixes the problem. We start the film with a smooth bank robbery, which introduces us to Foley and gets him put in prison, and the Glades breakout can still be the inciting incident, like it is in the book. It takes place about 10 minutes into the film, and the next 5 minutes after that is spent in the trunk with Foley and Sisko, starting off the romance plot. If we saw everything chronologically, the trunk scene literally wouldn't happen until about a third of the way through the film. But non-linear structure also means that flashbacks can be integrated pretty seamlessly, which sorts out another problem with this being an adaptation. Take this scene, where Cisco tells Daniels about what happened after the Glades breakout. In the book, it's just a long conversation, which could work in the film, but it would kill off the pacing. So instead, Soderbergh flashes back to where we left off earlier and shows Glenn crashing the getaway car after Karen convinced him to leave Jack and Buddy behind. This is way more visually interesting and maintains the fast pace the film has been gliding along at. The final edit really helps tighten the pace of the whole film, and a lot of this is done by withholding information until it's either needed or at its most emotionally resonant. One of the biggest payoffs of this is that we have to wait 90 minutes to find out why Foley throws his tie in the literal second shot of the film.
A scene like Jack going to see Ripley in his office about the job has more impact 90 minutes into the film than it would have 9 minutes into the film. You'd have nothing invested.
So that's a pretty good showcase of Soderbergh's mind as an editor, but he doesn't just edit his newer films, he shoots them too. And you can tell he learned quite a few things from this one. The cinematography is credited to Elliot Davis, who gives the different sections of the film different aesthetics. Lompoc, the desert prison, has a brighter colour palette with yellow jumpsuits, whereas Glades is shot much more bleakly, making use of blues and greens. Outside of the prisons, Miami is bright and warm, whereas Detroit is filmed with colder, gunmetal blue overtones. Soderbergh would use this trick again 2 years later when shooting Traffic. The Miami scenes are all overexposed to sell the illusion of being in warm, sunny Florida, and this blows out all the windows with white light, hiding the fact that Buddy's apartment is actually a set. And Soderbergh tried his own hand at shooting with the introductory shots of Detroit, which he filmed on his 35th birthday. The film mainly sticks to this colour palette of yellow or blue or both, and it reserves red for the scenes with Foley and Cisco, like the trunk scene. But for my money, the film's greatest scene is this one.
And you always remember it because it was there and you let it go and you think to yourself, what if I had stopped? What if I had said something? What if? What if?
It showcases the main characters at their most vulnerable, their dialogue at its most introspective, and the technical elements at their peak. The cinematography is beautiful. The characters sit at the hotel bar, next to a window, and snow falls outside. The red and white lights across the city skyline are all out of focus, and the red ones almost look like traffic lights, signifying the time out the characters are taking from the intense cat and mouse game they've been playing.
Can I buy you a drink?
This is also the scene where the dialogue tracks most parallel with the book. A quick conversation about bourbon is cut to keep up the pacing, but after that it's pretty much word for word. From here, the cinematography becomes more intimate, and we start intercutting between the bar and the bedroom, with the conversation continuing to play out in voiceover. We cut on specific actions, again increasing the level of intimacy, and all of the bedroom shots are filmed without sound, as Soderbergh knew this is how he wanted to incorporate them before shooting. This is where we get our final freeze frames, because after this time out, we're all caught up with the story and ready for the final act, where both the romance and the crime plots can come to their conclusion. And that's Out of Sight. The word I always used to describe it as is cool, but it also ends up on pretty much every sexiest film of all time list. It might not be Soderbergh's most memorable film, but it's definitely my favourite, and it shows really interesting problem solving. The film isn't playing out in an engaging enough way, play around with the structure. Too many locations making it overly complex, colour code them. Got a great scene in the book that just doesn't fit into the film, repurpose it. Maybe it can make a perfect opening scene. And also, it has probably the greatest death scene in all of cinema. I'll leave you with this.
Maurice!